70% are they're given advice to, and it's almost always left-wing.
I think that's a fair characterization, yes.
You can go consult with them before they give you the recommendations that are always followed. And if you don't consult with them, they might give you recommendations that in many ways harm the company and therefore harm the shareholders. Is that right, Mr. Crane?
It is, and we've seen that when companies get negative recommendations from the advice side, they'll immediately get a solicitation from the consulting side saying, hey, wouldn't you really like to have us help you out next year to avoid those negative recommendations from our friends down the hallway?
Yeah.
Pretty concerning fact pattern.
Will you pay the protection money? Will you pay the shakedown? The question wasn't for you, it's for Mr. Crane.
I understand that, but he doesn't know the answer, and I do.
Well, no, I wasn't asking you a question.
It is wrong. I did not allow
You might be able to do the consulting
services
and the
I did
recommendations.
not allow ISS to do consulting when I was
Does ISS do
president.
consulting now?
ISS does do consulting
Well,
now.
Shazam, there you have it. There you have it. My question, the way it works is the members get to ask the questions and to the people they want to give the answers. My question was to Mr. Crane.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to America First, Patriots. Today, we're diving deep into something that should absolutely terrify every single American who believes in free markets, democracy, and the principles that built this great nation. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe because we're fighting for the soul of America here, and we need every patriot in this battle. Also, if you want to support our mission to expose the truth and fight for America First policies, head over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/AmericaFirst, where you can support us for as low as $5 a month. Every dollar helps us continue this fight against the forces trying to destroy our country from within. What I'm about to show you is going to blow your mind. We just witnessed Congressman Jim Jordan, one of the few real fighters we have left in Congress, expose what might be the biggest scam in American corporate history. And folks, this isn't just about money. This is about the complete and total takeover of American businesses by radical left-wing ideologues who want to fundamentally transform our country.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Crane, what percentage of publicly traded equity shares are held by institutional investors and pension funds?
It's a very large percentage. I forget the exact number. It's north of 80, I believe.
80%? And because of that, most shareholder votes are cast through proxy voting because the shareholder can. Is that right?
That's exactly correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And proxy advisors advise or recommend to the institutional investors and the pension funds how they're supposed to vote. Is that right?
That's correct.
And is their advice followed?
Pardon?
Is their advice followed? Is the proxy advisor's advice typically followed by the institutional investors and the pension funds?
It's absolutely followed, and in many cases, their shares are automatically cast by the proxy firms in line with those recommendations.
So the institutional investors and pension fund are doing exactly what the proxy advisors had tell them.
That's exactly correct, yes, sir.
Okay. And who are the two largest again, who we've been talking about?
ISS and Glass Lewis.
ISS and Glass Lewis. And how much of the market do they control?
97%.
97% of the market, 80% of the shareholders, the equity shares are with institutional and pension investors, and their advice is followed 95% of the time.
That's essentially correct.
Wow, that's pretty big. That's pretty big. How much money are we talking about?
Trillions of dollars of equities across the market.
5 trillion, 20 trillion, 30 trillion, how much are we talking?
I don't know the size of the market, but it's a large number, the equity markets in the United States.
My understanding is it's at least $20 trillion. And there's,
sounds right to me.
And the other side says, nothing to look at here. Nothing to look at here, really. That seems like there's a lot to look at there, and that's why we're having this hearing. Now, what kind of advice? So their advice is followed 95% of the time, 70% of the market, over $20 trillion. What kind of advice are they giving?
It's advice on everything that comes before shareholders. It's how the company is run, how the executives are paid, the shareholder proposals that have been discussed. It's everything that comes before the shareholder base for a vote.
What kind of advice are they given in a political context?
We know that ISS, for example, recommended in favor of more than 80% of ESG shareholder proposals in
pro-ESG, pro-DEI?
As a general rule, yes. Not 100% of the time, but yes, as a general rule.
Vast majority of the time?
I would say yes.
Okay, so kind of leaning to the left, right?
I think that's probably a fair characterization.
Their advice is followed 95% of the time. They have 90% of the market. 70% are they're given advice to, and it's almost always left-wing.
I think that's a fair characterization, yes.
Is that how you see it, Mr. Egan?
I have no reason for disagreeing with that.
What about you, Mr. Griffin?
I think that while it varies by year, and we've seen sort of swings with somewhat mirroring the political election cycle,
Is that an accurate picture? Is that an accurate
overall.
framework?
Overall.
Okay. Now, but that's not the end of it, is it? Because it's even worse. Because this duopoly not only offers proxy advisor services, but consulting services as well.
That's exactly right.
Okay. So you can go consult with them before they give you the recommendations that are always followed. And if you don't consult with them, they might give you recommendations that in many ways harm the company and therefore harm the shareholders. Is that right, Mr. Crane?
It is, and we've seen that when companies get negative recommendations from the advice side, they'll immediately get a solicitation from the consulting side saying, hey, wouldn't you really like to have us help you out next year to avoid those negative recommendations from our friends down the hallway?
Yeah.
Pretty concerning fact pattern.
Will you pay the protection money? Will you pay the shakedown?
Exactly.
Holy cow, such a deal. Such a deal. And Ms. Minow was part of it all when she worked at ISS, is that right? The question wasn't for you, it's for Mr. Crane.
I understand that, but he doesn't know the answer, and I do.
Well, no, I wasn't asking you a question.
It is wrong. I did not allow
You might be able to do the consulting
ISS.
services and the
I did not
recommendations.
allow ISS to do consulting when I was
What does ISS do
president.
consulting now?
ISS does do consulting
Well,
now,
Shazam,
and
there
they're-
you have it. There you have it. My question, the way it works is the members get to ask the questions and to the people they want to give the answers. My question was to Mr. Crane. I appreciate you jumping in, Ms. Minow, and telling us that ISS does now offer consulting services in addition to the proxy advisor thing, which is the problem. Which is, well, not the full problem, but certainly part of the problem. Is that right, Mr. Crane?
I would agree with that, yes, sir.
And then you can even go maybe one step further and say on the platform, no competition's allowed, which I sort of get Ms. Minnow's argument on the Amazon issue, I sort of get, but it's almost like they got this thing rigged from start to finish and it's two companies. And the other side says, nothing to look at here. Well, I think that's kind of ridiculous. And I appreciate the chairman and his work on this important issue. With that, I yield back.
Chairman yields back.
Let me paint you the picture of what's happening here. We have just two companies, ISS and Glass Lewis, that control 97% of the proxy voting advice market in America. 97%. Think about that for a second. In a country built on competition and free markets, we have a virtual monopoly controlling how over $20 trillion worth of shareholder votes are cast. $20 trillion, patriots. That's not monopoly money we're talking about here. That's real wealth, real power, and real control over the American economy. But here's where it gets really disturbing. These institutional investors and pension funds, who control about 80% of all publicly traded equity shares, they're not making independent decisions. They're following the advice of these two companies 95% of the time. And get this, in many cases, these shares are automatically cast by the proxy firms in line with their recommendations. Automatically, without any human oversight or independent thought. So what we have here is a situation where two companies are essentially controlling how the largest corporations in America are run. They're deciding who gets paid what, how companies operate, what policies they adopt, and what direction they take. This is not capitalism, folks. This is corporate authoritarianism, and it's being used to push a radical left-wing agenda on American businesses and by extension on all of us. Jim Jordan did an excellent job exposing this during the hearing. He asked the right questions and got the answers that every American needs to hear. When he asked about what kind of advice these firms are giving, the answer was clear. They're recommending in favor of more than 80% of ESG shareholder proposals. ESG, for those who might not know, stands for environmental, social, and governance. Sounds innocent enough, right? Wrong. ESG is the Trojan horse that the radical left is using to force their woke ideology into every aspect of American business. Under the guise of being environmentally conscious and socially responsible, they're pushing climate change hysteria, diversity equity, and inclusion mandates, and other progressive policies that have nothing to do with running profitable businesses and everything to do with social engineering. When Jordan asked if this advice was leaning to the left, the witness confirmed it was a fair characterization. So we have two companies with virtually no competition, controlling trillions of dollars in voting power, and they're consistently pushing left-wing policies. This is not a free market. This is manipulation on a massive scale. But wait, it gets worse. Much worse. These same companies that are giving voting advice are also offering consulting services to the companies they're evaluating. Think about the conflict of interest here. They're essentially telling companies, hey, we're going to give you a bad recommendation that will hurt your stock price and your reputation unless you pay us to consult with you on how to get a better recommendation. Jordan called it exactly what it is, a shakedown, a protection racket. Pay the protection money, and maybe we'll give you a better recommendation. Don't pay, and we'll make sure our friends down the hallway give you recommendations that could devastate your company. This is not how free markets are supposed to work, patriots. This is how the mafia works. And here's what really gets me fired up about this whole situation. These aren't just random companies we're talking about. These are American companies. Companies that employ millions of Americans. Companies that contribute to our economy and our way of life. And they're being held hostage by two firms that are pushing an agenda that's fundamentally anti-American. Think about the implications of this. When these proxy advisory firms push ESG policies, they're not just affecting corporate boardrooms. They're affecting every single American. When they push climate change policies that restrict energy production, your gas prices go up. When they push diversity mandates that prioritize race and gender over merit, the quality of products and services goes down. When they push social justice initiatives that attack traditional American values, our entire culture shifts in a direction that our founders never intended. This is economic warfare, plain and simple. And it's being waged against the American people by people who have never been elected to any office, who have never been held accountable to voters, and who seem to have no interest in what's actually good for America or Americans. The fact that Jim Jordan had to drag this information out in congressional hearing should tell you everything you need to know about how the mainstream media and the political establishment view this issue. They don't want you to know about it. They don't want you to understand how the system really works. They want you to believe that these are just market forces at play, that this is just how business works in the modern world. But patriots, this is not how business is supposed to work. This is not the free market capitalism that built America into the greatest nation on earth. This is crony capitalism at its worst. This is a system where a few connected insiders get to control the entire economy while the rest of us suffer the consequences. And let's talk about those consequences for a minute. When these proxy firms push ESG policies, American companies become less competitive internationally. While we're busy worrying about carbon footprints and diversity quotas, companies in China and other countries are focused on one thing: making money and dominating markets. They're not handicapping themselves with social justice initiatives. They're not limiting their energy use to fight climate change. They're focused on winning, and while we're distracted by woke nonsense, they're eating our lunch. This is exactly the kind of thing that President Trump warned us about. He understood that America first means putting American interests ahead of globalist agendas. He understood that our businesses need to be focused on competing and winning, not on appeasing left-wing activists who want to use corporate boardrooms to implement policies they could never get passed through democratic processes. The beauty of what Jim Jordan did in this hearing is that he exposed the whole corrupt system for what it is. He showed us that this isn't about legitimate business advice or market efficiency. This is about control. This is about power. This is about forcing American companies to adopt policies that the American people would never vote for if they had a choice. And that's the key point here, patriots. We don't have a choice. When these proxy firms control how $20 trillion in votes are cast, and when they consistently push left-wing policies, the American people are being disenfranchised. Our retirement funds, our pension funds, our 401k accounts are being used to vote for policies that we fundamentally disagree with. Our own money is being used against us. This is taxation without representation all over again. Except this time, it's not the British taxing us. It's our own corporations controlled by unelected proxy advisors implementing policies that hurt American workers, American families, and American values. Now, I want to talk about the woman who tried to interrupt Jordan during his questioning. This is a perfect example of how the swamp operates. When Jordan was asking tough questions and getting answers that exposed the corruption, she tried to jump in and defend the system. She tried to claim that ISS doesn't do consulting and then had to admit that they do. This is the kind of deception and misdirection that we've come to expect from the establishment. They don't want accountability. They don't want transparency. They want to keep this system operating in the shadows where the American people can't see what's really happening. But thanks to fighters like Jim Jordan, we're getting a glimpse behind the curtain, and what we're seeing is absolutely disgusting. The fact that this hearing had to happen at all tells you everything you need to know about how broken our system has become. In a functioning democracy, with a functioning free market, you wouldn't need congressional hearings to expose the fact that two companies control almost the entire proxy voting system. There would be competition. There would be transparency. There would be accountability. But we don't have that. What we have is a rigged system that benefits the connected few at the expense of everyone else. What we have is a system where your pension fund and your 401k are being used to vote for policies that you would never support if you had a direct say in the matter. This is bigger than just corporate governance, patriots. This is about the future of America. When two companies can control $20 trillion in voting power and use that power to push left-wing policies, we're not living in a free market democracy anymore. We're living in a corporate oligarchy where a few insiders make decisions that affect all of our lives. And here's what really concerns me about this whole situation. This proxy voting system is just one example of how the establishment has rigged the game. Think about all the other ways that a small number of people and organizations control massive amounts of power in our society. The mainstream media, big tech companies, academic institutions, government bureaucracies. In every case, you have a small number of people making decisions that affect millions of Americans, and those people are almost never held accountable for the consequences of their decisions. This is not the America that our founders envisioned. This is not the America that generations of patriots fought and died to protect. This is not the America that we want to leave to our children and grandchildren. But here's the good news, patriots. We're not powerless. We have people like Jim Jordan who are willing to fight for us. We have platforms like this channel where we can expose the truth and educate our fellow Americans about what's really happening. And we have the power to support politicians and policies that put America first. The first step is understanding the problem. And thanks to Jim Jordan's questioning, we now have a clear picture of how the proxy voting system works and how it's being used to push left-wing policies on American companies. The second step is demanding action. We need to contact our representatives and demand that they investigate this system and implement reforms that restore competition and accountability. We need to demand that pension funds and institutional investors start acting in the best interests of their beneficiaries, not in the interests of political activists. We need to demand transparency in how these proxy advisory firms operate and who's funding them. We need to demand that American companies start focusing on making money and creating value for shareholders, not on appeasing social justice warriors. This is not just about corporate governance. This is about the fundamental question of who controls America. Is it going to be the American people acting through democratic processes and free markets? Or is it going to be a small group of unelected bureaucrats and activists who use their positions of power to implement policies that the American people never voted for? Jim Jordan's questioning showed us that right now, it's the latter. Two companies control virtually the entire proxy voting system, and they're using that power to push left-wing policies. $20 trillion in voting power is being controlled by people who have never been elected, never been held accountable, and never had to answer to the American people for their decisions. This is not sustainable, patriots. This is not the America we want to live in. This is not the America we want to leave to our children. We need to fight back, and we need to fight back now. The good news is that exposure is the first step toward reform. Now that we know how this system works, we can start demanding changes. We can start holding these companies accountable. We can start supporting politicians who are willing to take on the establishment and fight for the American people. But we can't do it alone. We need every patriot in this fight. We need you to share this video, to talk to your friends and family about what's happening, to contact your representatives and demand action. We need you to support candidates who understand that America first means putting the interests of American workers and American families ahead of globalist agendas and social justice initiatives. The stakes couldn't be higher, patriots. The future of American capitalism, American democracy, and American values is at stake. We have a choice to make. We can continue to let a small group of unelected bureaucrats and activists control our economy and our society, or we can fight back and restore power to the American people where it belongs. I know what choice I'm making, and I hope you'll join me in this fight. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and support us on Patreon at patreon.com/AmericaFirst for as low as $5 a month. Every dollar helps us continue to expose the truth and fight for America First policies. Until next time, keep fighting for America, patriots. Our country depends on it.